Hello Math 152 students. In this video we're going to be taking a look at qualitative versus quantitative. And I want to remind you of our previous example with the Reese's Pieces. We were looking at a sample of Reese's Pieces, and just to connect to some of the other vocabulary, each sample is made up of lots of individuals. Each individual in our sample has lots of characteristics. A variable is just a characteristic of one of our individuals. And every variable has a value. So for example, this individual has lots of different characteristics, such as color, weight, shape. Those are all variables. The value of the variable, in this case the color is orange, so it's a value, and I could place the Reese's Pieces on a scale and weigh it to get a weight, and that would be the value for the weight variable. If I pick a different individual, right, this individual has a different value for color. It's brown and not orange. So different individuals have different values for a particular variable. And when we hear a variable, we want to decide if it's a qualitative or quantitative variable. Let's start with quantitative. When you think about quantitative, your brain probably is thinking quantity or numbers. And for most numbers, you may be able to think about them as quantitative variables, but not all, and that's the tricky part. So for something like weight, it's hard to think about the weight of Reese's Pieces. We might have to get out a scale and measure in grams or even smaller. But let's think about the weight of an individual, like a person. So let's say a person weighs 150 pounds. That's a number that describes their weight. If it were to go up by 5 or decrease by 10, we could say that person gained 5 pounds or lost 10 pounds. The new number relates back to the old number when we're doing math to it in a way that makes sense. Whereas not all numbers have this idea or have this characteristic. So let's say we're taking a look at football jerseys. A football jersey associates a number with a player. So if your jersey is 17, jersey 17 belongs to a player, it describes them. But you can't really do math with it or treat it the same way as we did the weight. For example, if I add 5, 22, right, what does that mean? Jersey 22 might not even be a player. It doesn't really relate back to 17. It doesn't mean, well, this person is 5 spots ahead. Or if I subtract 10, jersey 7, it doesn't really relate back in a way that I can make sense of. So be careful here. One of the things I want you to think about is the tricky ones, right? Things that are numbers, but not quantitative variables. Whereas qualitative, we mentioned football jerseys, but also things like color. It's a description, but it's non-numerical, or we can't really do math, even if it is a number like football jersey. It's just something that describes or categorizes. So another thing we want to think about is discrete and continuous. If you are a qualitative variable, then those two terms don't apply. But if you have a quantitative variable, you can further classify it as discrete or continuous. So you want to be careful that you can't use discrete and continuous for every variable because it only applies to your quantitative or numbers that you can really treat like numbers. So let's think about those two terms. For discrete and continuous, think about how you get the value. For example, weight, you step on a scale and you measure your weight. So it's calculated for you by the scale. So the idea of measuring is associated with continuous. Whereas if I ask you, how many children do you have? You would answer a number, right? And that number, if you add 1, new baby, right? Or if you add 2 at the same time, you had twins, right? Those numbers make sense. And in that case, when you're deciding how many children do I have, you don't put your children on a scale or take a measuring tape to them. You point to them and count. You say, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children in case I forgot, right? Or I have 1, 2, 3 pets. So if you can think about counting the values versus measuring, measuring is associated with continuous and counting is associated with discrete. If you have whole number values, a lot of times those are discrete, like you're pointing and counting, but be careful. There are some exceptions. really go back to the counting versus measuring.